Tell me again why we're afraid of a grandpa with a rifle. The Merc captain's laughter echoed through the broken high-rises of Sector 7, just seconds before his helmet exploded like a crushed tin can. His headless body slumped against the armored transport's interior wall as his squad mates screamed, ducking behind metal plating and frantically scanning for drones. There were none. No red scopes. No buzzing aerials. Just static silence and a city so dead it felt like it was holding its breath. A rooftop somewhere nearby still echoed with the subtle metallic ping of a bolt-action slide returning home, but none of them heard it. Boone, an old man draped in a dusty ghillie suit that blended perfectly with the charred bricks around him, calmly adjusted his sights and murmured, "Mock me again. I dare you." Boone hadn't fired a rifle in 4 years, not since Unit Kilo 13 had been wiped off the books by people who wore medals but had no scars. He'd stayed silent since then, living above a crumbling library where the only visitors were pigeons and ghosts. Below him, the once booming Neoterra district had turned into ash and weeds, thanks to corporate mercenaries clearing it block by block for a mining claim. The syndicate's official line was that it was uninhabited industrial waste. Boone liked that. Made for fewer questions. But they shouldn't have come to Sector 7. They especially shouldn't have come laughing. When the first Merc's body hit the floor, chaos broke loose over their comms. The squad leader screamed for visual confirmation, demanded drone sweeps, infrared scans, and backup squads. Boone kept listening, leaning against an old wall that had once been the side of a bookstore. He didn't even flinch when they launched suppressing fire into the general direction of his building. Most of it hit lower levels or missed entirely. The structure groaned, but Boone had reinforced his perch years ago, waiting for a day like this. Some people built gardens when they retired. He built blind spots. A second voice, younger and shakier, came over the comms. "Where's the shot coming from? There's no heat signature, no visual. Could be cloaked drones." The panic was sharp. Boone smiled faintly, unwrapping a protein bar and taking a bite like he was feeding birds in the park. Through the scope, he saw them scrambling like ants whose hill had been kicked. One of them, a rookie by the look of his unpolished armor, was waving his arms, barking orders while standing fully exposed. Boone marked the crosswind, adjusted 2 clicks right, and whispered, "Discipline saves lives." The round struck just below the rookie's neck, sending him tumbling backward over a railing. His body hit the second-story walkway with a crunch and didn't move. The Mercs finally scattered, disappearing into buildings and behind transports. Boone didn't fire again. He waited. Let them sit in the stew of their fear. He sipped coffee from a tin cup he'd reheated on a solar plate. There was no need to rush. He had food, water, solar power, and every square foot of this district memorized like a lover's face. More importantly, he had authorization. 4 years, he'd been under strict silence protocol, his mission terminated without acknowledgement. But this morning, a device the size of a pebble in his coat pocket had blinked green for the first time in almost a decade. A simple message, green light. Final payback. Clean house. To Boone, that wasn't a signal. That was permission to finally remember who he used to be. The Merc squad, now down 2, tried regrouping near a half-collapsed overpass. They set up a comm relay and dropped a motion-detecting turret. Boone didn't care. He wasn't moving from this rooftop. Let them sweat. He leaned back against the bricks and watched the sky for a moment. Blue skies today. Strange, how quiet war could feel when no one was screaming. Just comm static and dust dancing through sunlight. They started taunting again, using the same open frequency he'd been listening on for hours. "Old man, that all you got? 2 shots and a hidey hole? Come down and fight like someone who matters." Boone didn't respond. He just marked the relay's uplink port in his scope, tapped in an old wind pattern chart on a wrist pad, and breathed out. The bullet didn't make a sound when it tore through the air and shredded the comm unit. Just a quick electrical pop and then silence again. Inside the Merc transport, panic turned to fury. One of them, heavier and bulkier than the rest, slammed a fist against the metal wall. "That's it. I'm going up. I don't care how old he is, his gunner wish he stayed dead." Boone watched him stump off with his exosuit whirring from overcompensated hydraulics. Too heavy. Too loud. No respect for terrain. Boone clicked his tongue softly. That's mistake number 3. The man climbed fast, but Boone had rigged a door 2 buildings over with a pressure plate on the 3rd step. As soon as the Merc kicked it open, the plate sent a silent signal to a drone core in the alley below. The core exploded upward in a column of compressed air and scrap metal. The Merc's armor protected his vitals, but the shockwave sent him flying backward into a rebar pipe sticking from a wall. Boone didn't need to confirm the kill. Gravity and poor planning had already taken care of it. Boone finally spoke over the open channel, his voice dry as bone dust. This city has its rules. Rule number 1? Don't stand in the open. Then he paused. Rule number 2? Don't mistake silence for safety. The channel went dead again. A bird landed on Boone's scope. He gently nudged it away. Not yet, he whispered. Back at the Syndicate command ship in orbit, a commander reviewed footage from helmet cams now gone dark. She narrowed her eyes at the kill timestamps. 1 shot, 1 kill. No visible tech. Just long pauses followed by sudden, silent deaths. She didn't know Boone's name, but she leaned back in her chair and muttered, "Whatever that is down there, it's not a sniper. It's a warning." Back on the rooftop, Boone stood slowly, his knees creaking. He ran a gloved hand down the rifle's stock. It was nicked and scorched, but still as deadly as the day it was forged. He scanned the horizon. More Mercs were coming. He could hear their tanks now, whining engines and stumping boots echoing down the dead avenues of Sector 7. Boone didn't flinch. He reloaded with practiced ease and whispered to no one, "They mucked the wrong rooftop." Then he slid the bolt forward, and the rifle clicked shut like a tomb lid. Smoke curled from the edge of a shattered window frame as Boone calmly swept his rifle back into its nest of fabric, sandbags, and carved concrete. The city had gone quiet again, that deep, eerie stillness that made even birds hesitate to fly. He moved without rush, adjusting his scope settings, flipping a toggle on his thermal pad, and sipping the last of his coffee while his enemies below scrambled like blind rats in a tunnel. Boone wasn't in a hurry. He never was. Snipers weren't supposed to chase chaos. They were supposed to control it with patience. And right now, Boone had all the patience in the world. Down below, the surviving Mercs regrouped behind an armored crawler parked crooked across a sunken boulevard. The crawler's thick tires hissed steam and coolant, evidence of the pressure it had taken while trying to blast through Boone's makeshift kill zone. Now it sat like a wounded beast, tail flicking nervously as a squad of 6 tried to decide whether they were still predators or prey. Boone watched them through his optics, tagging faces, estimating armor weaknesses, and noting their behavioral tells. One was trembling at the hands. One kept checking over his shoulder. One was talking too fast. They were breaking faster than they realized. He didn't need to shoot yet. He just needed to let the fear cook a little longer. A voice crackled over the mercenaries' secure comms, low and gravelly, different from the fools he had just dismantled. This one had composure. "Hunter team, report." The squad hesitated. Then a younger Merc keyed his MIC sniper in Sector 7. "We've lost 3. Can't get a visual. It's like he's part of the damn city." The voice paused. "You're telling me you're being picked off by one man?" The reply came slower. "We think so. But he's not just a sniper. He's something else. Knows the layout. Anticipates movement. He's inside our comms. Traps us before we move." The line went silent again for a few seconds before the voice responded. "Fall back to the rally point. Do not engage until I arrive." Boone tilted his head, amused. Reinforcements. Of course. That was inevitable. But they were already too late. This wasn't a firefight anymore. This was chess, and Boone was 10 moves in. He switched optics modes and scanned the western rooftops. Sure enough, a quad-blade drone carrier was approaching from the upper atmosphere, dropping off another platoon of Mercs at the old financial district 2 blocks away. Boone marked their landing vector, counted boots, and began a silent timer. 30 minutes. That was their window before his next trick collapsed the entire street grid beneath their feet. He tapped a metal case beside him and opened it slowly. Inside were 4 canisters marked with ancient military serial codes, their labels long scratched out. Improvised seismic charges, modified to tunnel and plant themselves before releasing shock pulses. Boone had deployed them months ago, using maintenance shafts and sewer lines. Now all it took was one command from his wristpad and the street they were about to march through would become a steel grave. He didn't plan to use it yet. Not until they gave him the green light to wipe the board. As the new squad landed and began their patrol patterns, Boone turned his scope back to the first group. They were retreating awkwardly, dragging one of their wounded while trying to maintain overwatch. He could have taken them out easily. One shot to the knee of the lead soldier, then picked them off during the panic. But he didn't. Not yet. They needed to reach the rally point. He wanted them all clustered when the next act began. Pain had more power when it was shared. Back at his rooftop, a pigeon landed beside Boone's foot and stared up at him. He nudged it gently with his boot. "Still here? Thought you'd get the message." The bird flapped away lazily, indifferent. Boone looked over at the old radio transmitter wedged between 2 crates of ammunition. He hadn't used it in years, but now its single red light pulsed softly. He flipped it on, tuned to a specific band, and waited. Static hissed, then a soft female voice broke through. "This is Echo. Still watching, old man." Boone pressed the mic. "I never stopped. You bring the package." The reply was short. "Landing in 15. South End. Don't shoot me." Boone clicked off the radio. Echo was coming. That changed the plan, but not the outcome. The last time he had seen Echo, she'd been half his age and twice as reckless, dragging him out of a collapsed trench with a shattered arm and laughing the whole time. She'd vanished after Kilo 13 was disbanded, declared KIA by command. But Boone had never believed it. Now here she was, years later, arriving like a ghost with secrets in her hands. If she was bringing a package, it wasn't cookies. It was data. Likely proof that these Mercs weren't just here to clear land. They were here to silence something. Or someone. Probably both. Boone adjusted his position and laid out a secondary weapon beside him. A short-range carbine, compact and deadly, perfect for close defense if someone managed to get near. It hadn't been fired in years. The barrel was clean, but it still smelled like memories. He ran a hand over it and then checked the edge of his rooftop for possible breach points. So far, the Mercs hadn't even come close. But with new boots on the ground and a higher-ranking officer inbound, things would escalate fast. Boone wasn't worried. If they got close, that just meant he wouldn't have to walk far to bury them. Down below, the rally point turned into a full operation zone. The new squad set up jammers, aerial recon, and surveillance drones. Boone smirked. None of it would help. He'd long ago built signal mirrors into the district's shattered windows, sending fake reflections and ghost signals to anyone not on his old frequency. Their systems would see a dozen Boone signatures all over the block, like a pack of ghosts watching from every corner. They'd chase phantoms until exhaustion made them sloppy. That's when the real killing would begin. One Merc climbed a nearby tower, clearly trying to get a higher vantage point. He was slow, cocky, walking upright like he didn't believe in consequences. Boone waited until he stopped, stretched, and signaled down with a thumbs up. Then Boone squeezed the trigger. The shot was so clean it looked like the man had just decided to sit down forever. He toppled silently, crashing through a billboard and landing face first in a rusted balcony. No one even saw where the shot came from. Panic spread again, but quieter this time. The new commander didn't yell. He just gave a new order. "Initiate building sweep." "He's still watching us." Boone closed his eyes for a second and breathed deep. His city, his rules. Let them climb. Let them try. He wasn't the one surrounded. They were. And every second they spent mucking the rooftop sniper was a second they moved deeper into the jaws of a machine they would never understand. Because Boone wasn't just shooting to kill. He was playing the long game. He was bleeding them, psychologically, tactically, surgically. One nerve at a time. The hum of Echo's dropship faded into the distance as she emerged from the skeletal frame of a collapsed parking tower. Dust clung to her tactical vest, and her boots crunched softly across the broken concrete as she moved with quiet precision, head on a swivel, rifle low but ready. Boone had already spotted her minutes before, watched her dismount, dodge a patrol, and slip through a ventilation shaft like she still remembered how to vanish. That alone told him she hadn't gone soft. She moved like muscle memory ran the show, like someone who hadn't stopped training just because the war had been taken off the books. She reached the rooftop without a word, crouching beside his position with a smirk half buried behind a dust mask. Boone grunted and handed her a water pouch. For a long moment, they didn't speak. The city muttered beneath them, distant engine whines, sporadic comm static, and the faint metal clatter of mercenaries dragging equipment into position. Finally, Echo broke the silence. Still hate helmets? Boone didn't look at her. Can't feel the wind in a helmet. She chuckled once, low and warm. Still poetic. That's disturbing. He glanced at her, one eyebrow slightly raised. You bring the package. She nodded and slid a small drive from a hidden panel in her forearm guard. Pulled it from an old net node in Kilo 13's archive. Encrypted. Took 3 burner satellites just to move it without being flagged. Boone took it gently, almost reverently, and plugged it into the side of his wrist pad. Lines of green code flickered across the screen. Then a file opened. One name repeated over and over again in every document, every map, every comm transcript. Sector 7. It hadn't been an accident that the Mercs came here. It had been a slow, careful cleansing. One block at a time. One witness at a time. And Boone was the last name on the list. Echo sat back, scanning the data as Boone tapped through old reports. Classified operations. Wiped identities. Deniable assets. Mercenaries contracted by a shadow branch of the mining syndicate to recover or erase any trace of what really happened here during the off-world conflict. Apparently, Kilo 13 had stumbled across something they weren't supposed to, a weapons dump hidden beneath the old city. Not human. Not even alien in the usual sense. Something older. Something they couldn't explain. Command had ordered silence. Boone hadn't followed. He had buried the truth instead, deep and sealed with explosives, then walked away from everything before they could erase him too. Now they were back to finish what they'd started. Only they hadn't counted on ghosts who refused to die. Echo pulled a small drone from her pack, wound up its rotor manually, and let it lift off into the sky, disguised as a bird. Its camera feed appeared on Boone's pad within seconds, showing the Mercs' rally point evolving into a fortified base. Dozens of new troops. Mobile command units. Thermal scanners. Even a mechanized walker rolling in from the south. Boone zoomed in on one of the lead officers, a tall alien in ornate armor with a long scar crossing his brow and a face that looked like it hadn't smiled in decades. Boone tapped the screen. That him? Echo nodded grimly. Grell Vosk. Commander of the Black Warrant. Doesn't leave jobs undone. He's got kill lists longer than planetary census records. Boone sighed, stretched his fingers, and reset his scope. Well, he should have picked a quieter rooftop. The Mercs began to sweep adjacent buildings, clearing rooms floor by floor. Boone and Echo moved in unison, relocating silently to a backup nest 2 buildings over. Boone had prepped half a dozen sniper stations in this district, all wired with emergency exits, fallback points, and explosives for denial. Echo whistled as she entered the new hide. You prepped for an invasion or a siege. Boone set the rifle down and chambered a new round. I stopped prepping. I started sculpting. Echo smiled faintly. You're still crazy. Boone gave a thin grin. Still alive. As the enemy closed in, Boone changed tactics. He let one of the sweep teams get close, real close. Close enough to think they'd found him. He waited until they formed up in a stairwell, for deep, one man on overwatch. Then he shot the fire escape cable, sending a counterweight through the nearest window and knocking all 4 Mercs off balance. A second later, Echo hit a manual trigger, and a flashbang burst from a mailbox they had rigged earlier. The sweep team collapsed in chaos, blinded, disoriented. Boone fired once, twice, clean shots. Non-lethal. He left them breathing but twitching on the floor. The rest of the Merc unit heard the screams but didn't get to see what happened. That was the point. Let them imagine worse than death. They changed formation, moving in pairs, covering more angles, hesitating more. The fear was starting to set in again, this time colder, deeper. These weren't just losses. These were surgical removals, painless if you blinked, horrifying if you looked too long. Boone was building a legend in real time, and the Mercs didn't even know they were part of the story yet. Echo watched the team leaders arguing over open comms, disagreeing on approach, losing cohesion. "They'll call air support soon," she warned. Boone nodded. "Let them. Air support has to land eventually." He opened his pack and pulled out a small device shaped like a brick of clay, covered in wires and signal nodes. Echo recognized it instantly. "Is that one of ours?" Boone pressed a button, and the screen lit up. "Last piece of Kilo 13 tech ever manufactured. Ghost Spike. Fires a low-wave signal that tells every friendly asset within 20 clicks to burn everything." Echo stared at it, mouth slightly open. "That's suicide code." Boone shrugged. "Or a party invitation." The Mercs finally zeroed in on the building beneath them. Boone could hear the faint thunk of boots on steel stairwells. Echo slid into a backup tunnel, rifle in hand. Boone stayed where he was. Waited. At the last second, when the breach charge was set against the door below him, he triggered the failsafe. The entire stairwell caved in with a roar, swallowing 6 Mercs in dust and concrete. Boone moved to the edge of the roof and looked down through the haze, watching their stunned expressions as they tried to radio for help. The comms didn't work. Echo had jammed them 2 minutes earlier. Boone raised his voice just enough to be heard through the open shaft. "Still think you're hunters?" The silence afterward was total. The Mercs dragged themselves backward, away from the wreckage, away from the voice in the dark. Echo returned a minute later, nodding at the results. Boone just sat down, breathing slowly, watching the smoke rise. He handed her a detonator. "Time to tighten the noose." Echo looked at it, then at him. "What about the green light?" Boone adjusted his scope, eyes narrowing on the commander pacing behind armored glass far across the street. "Not yet. I want him to see what it looks like when an entire army gets outplayed by a man who refuses to die." Echo smiled coldly, the wind tugging at her hair. "That's not strategy. That's theater." Boone's finger tightened over the trigger. "Exactly." Grell Vask stood behind reinforced glass, watching the smoke rise from what used to be an entire fire team. His face didn't move, but his fingers flexed against the control rail like they were trying to crush it. Beside him, 2 junior officers hesitated to speak. They'd never seen him pause before. Vask had commanded death squads on acid worlds, led exterminations in vacuum cities, and was known for completing missions in blood or ash. But this was different. This wasn't war. This was precision annihilation. His men weren't dying in battle. They were being unraveled like a thread pulled loose from a tapestry. One after another, clean, silent, and humiliating. And the sniper still hadn't shown his face. Boone watched Vask from 4 buildings away, peering through a layer of haze and heat distortion, eyes calm and breath steady. It was time. Not for the final shot, but for the first whisper of collapse. He wasn't interested in killing Vask yet. That would be too quick, too clean. Boone wanted him to feel it, what it meant to lose control. He rotated his scope slightly and fixed it on the mech walker stationed outside the command post. A towering behemoth with railgun arms and autosensor turrets, it had been parked there like a threat, a monument to superiority. Boone had seen hundreds like it in his career. Every one of them had the same flaw. He fired. The round hit the walker's secondary power coupling, not enough to destroy it, but enough to trigger a false overload. Warning sirens blared. Turrets began rotating wildly, sensors glitched, and the walker's stabilizers locked in defensive mode. It let out a mechanical groan and spun toward the nearest moving object, which happened to be a cluster of Vask's own men forming a perimeter. They yelled and scattered. The walker, confused by false data, fired a warning burst. 3 were clipped by the shot. 1 lost his arm. The others dove for cover, screaming over each other. Boone didn't smile. He just chambered another round. Echo slid in beside him, crouched low, breathing hard. You really want them turning on themselves already? Boone nodded once. They do better work when they're afraid of their own tools. She checked the drone feed on her wristpad. Perimeters falling apart. They've pulled Reckon off the southern line. You've got a blind corridor up to 25 meters. I can move if you need. Boone kept his eye on the scope. Not yet. We wait for the break. Across the plaza, Vask roared orders into a secure channel, demanding internal diagnostics, override keys, a new sweep formation, and air support. His voice stayed low, but the tension in his posture said everything. He knew they weren't being picked off at random. He knew there was a mind behind this, someone with experience, someone who had planned every move. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that the city itself had been rigged long before his boots ever touched the ground. Boone had been sculpting this battlefield for years, building traps into the architecture, coding ghosts into the surveillance systems, designing a web with himself at the center. And Vask had flown his entire army straight into it. Boone shifted position. The wind was changing slightly, and he had to correct for drift. His next shot wasn't for damage. It was for fear. A clean round into the reinforced glass at Vask's feet. The bullet didn't penetrate, but the impact cracked the surface just enough to spider across the floor. Vask froze mid-sentence. Everyone around him went silent. Boone whispered through gritted teeth, I'm not aiming for you yet. Just showing you the menu. Echo exhaled slowly, her breath shaky. That's going to push him over the edge. Boone replied, Good. Rage makes you sloppy. Sure enough, moments later, Vask barked a direct order into the comms, full advance. Every remaining unit was to fan out through the city, building to building, no more sweeps, just purge. Clear everything. Burn anyone. Bring the sniper's body back in pieces. Boone tapped the detonator Echo had handed him the day before. He just gave me permission. In the eastern block, 3 charges ignited simultaneously. They weren't explosions, at least, not in the traditional sense. They were directional pressure bursts, built to collapse floors, not blow them upward. Entire buildings folded inward, pancaking on themselves, burying dozens of troops and turning the clean street grid into an uneven wasteland. The ripple effect shattered morale. Radios screamed with voices begging for medics, screaming for evacuation, yelling conflicting orders. Boone turned his scope to the southern alley and saw Vask's command vehicle pivoting out of its protected zone. It was running. Not retreating, repositioning. He knew staying in one place made him a target. But Boone had known that too. The alley he chose led straight into the trap zone. Echo watched the chaos with a stunned expression. You're not just bleeding them. You're flaying them. Boone's reply was soft but deadly. No one walks into Sector 7 and makes it out unless I let them. That's always been the rule. The next phase came fast. Boone used his ghost spike, activating fake heat signatures across rooftops a mile away, tricking orbital surveillance into thinking a fleet of reinforcements was landing. Vask panicked. He redirected half his remaining forces toward the ghost signature, pulling away from his own defense net. Boone took advantage of the hole, moving quietly with Echo through maintenance tunnels to the western sector. They emerged behind a stack of burnt-out vehicles where Boone had stashed an old sniper drone. It was manual, not on the net, just a direct uplink with a human trigger. Boone knelt beside it, dialed in a new angle, and whispered, Time to take the head off the snake. Vask stepped from his mobile command unit with a squad of 4 armored guards. He was barking at them, waving toward a building where he believed the sniper was hiding. Boone adjusted elevation. The drone's barrel aligned with Vask's chest. But Boone didn't pull the trigger. Not yet. He fired instead at the guard to Vask's left, a high-ranking tech officer. The man crumpled. Vask spun, confused, disoriented, exposed. Boone whispered again, this time into the open comms line he had hacked earlier. I'm still not aiming for you, Vask. But next time, I won't miss. Vask visibly froze. The guards around him tightened formation. One barked for an evac. Vask refused, screaming that he would end this himself. Boone knew he was close to snapping. Echo leaned over. You want him broken, not dead. Boone answered, I want him to beg for death in front of what's left of his men. And I want them to watch me say no. The sky began to darken. Not from clouds, but from the drone swarm Boone had called from reserve caches buried beneath the district. Each drone carried a flash pulse, a signal that scrambled comms, blinded thermal sensors, and flooded cameras with static. Boone's signature returned to the field, everywhere, all at once. Now the Mercs saw him in every shadow, every window, every street. They fired blindly. They screamed. They hit each other. Boone watched them crumble not from bullets, but from the weight of fear. He looked at Echo. Her face was pale, stunned. This isn't a war, she whispered. It's a lesson. Boone stood up slowly, lifting his rifle. No. It's the final exam. And they didn't study. Then, with one breath, a sharp gust cut across the rooftop as Boone stared through the scope, not blinking, not breathing. The moment hung suspended between heartbeats. Vask had moved behind cover again, barking fragmented orders over an encrypted channel, unaware that Boone had already mapped his position 3 times through seismic echo. Boone could hear the man's voice like a rusted blade, angry, unraveling, almost desperate now. What had begun as a confident occupation had become a disaster. The mercenaries were splintered across a battlefield that didn't obey their tactics. Their advanced tech meant nothing here. Their numbers had turned against them. Boone wasn't fighting on their terms. He dragged them, step by step, into a war they didn't understand, where patience was deadlier than firepower and silence was a weapon they'd never trained against. The green light blinked once on Boone's pad. The final authorization had come. Not a message, not a command, just a symbol. It meant all external constraints were lifted. Orbit was watching. The failsafe was live. Boone looked to Echo, who was crouched beside a stack of concrete debris, her rifle slung and a ghost drone buzzing near her shoulder. She met his eyes and gave a single nod. She knew what it meant. Everything they'd built toward, every round fired, every trap sprung, had been for this. Boone tapped into the uplink and activated the city's old reflector grid, a buried system that had once been used for long-range solar communication. He had rebuilt it, refocused it, and now, one final shot would light it up like a flare across the galaxy. His target wasn't Vask, not yet. It was the beacon panel mounted inside an old rail station tower half a mile away. Boone adjusted for range, calculated the atmosphere, double-checked the structural alignment, and exhaled. He pulled the trigger. The sound was almost gentle. The round flew, curved slightly through an updraft, and struck the panel dead center. The reflector beam activated in an instant, invisible to the naked eye but glowing like fire in the orbital scan arrays. It painted a trail, a line of light across the ruined grid below, marking every active enemy signature, every vehicle, every mech, and every open comm. Above the planet, a silent shape moved into position. The satellite didn't broadcast. It didn't threaten. It simply aligned with the beam. Then, from the heavens, a column of light descended like judgment itself. White-hot and silent, it lanced down through the smog, slicing the street open in a perfect line, vaporizing vehicles, melting armor, and silencing screams before they had a chance to rise. The Merc base vanished in a clean burn. Concrete boiled. Steel turned liquid. And when it was over, there was nothing left in that corridor but heat distortion and falling ash. Boone sat back, the rifle cooling beside him. Echo let out a long breath. "Good," she whispered. "Did we just glass a city block?" Boone didn't answer. He just stood, rolled his shoulders, and walked to the roof's edge. Below, fires flickered in broken windows. Far off, some Mercs still ran, blinded, lost, not knowing which direction held safety and which was a death trap. Boone watched them scatter. He didn't need to pursue. They wouldn't last the night. Vask was the only one left who mattered, and even he was already fractured. Boone began the descent, moving with mechanical calm. Every step was quiet. Every motion exact. He navigated stairwells, broken beams, shafts of dust and smoke, like a phantom pulled from war's forgotten stories. Echo followed, watching his back but saying nothing. When they reached street level, they moved through the aftermath like ghosts. Craters glowed faintly from the orbital strike. Rubble smoked. Somewhere a damaged mech twitched, its systems fried but its servos still sparking in protest. Boone ignored it. They reached the central plaza, once a command center, now a burned skeleton. Vask stood alone at its center, weapon drawn, armor scorched, helmet gone. He was shaking, but still upright. He turned slowly as Boone approached, recognition blooming in his eyes like slow horror. Boone stopped a dozen feet away. He didn't raise his rifle. He didn't need to. Vask's own gun dropped an inch. "You," he rasped, voice hollow. "You were supposed to be erased. Kilo 13 was gone." Boone's voice was gravel. Kilo 13 was reclassified. The rest, they are dead. I'm what's left. Vask's hand trembled on the trigger. You think this ends anything? The contract was signed off by 7 syndicates. They'll just send more. Boone stepped closer, eyes cold. Then I'll keep cleaning house. One rooftop at a time. Vask lifted his weapon, trying to summon some last shred of pride, but before he could fire, Echo appeared behind him and placed the barrel of her sidearm against the back of his knee. A single shot dropped him to the ground screaming. He writhed, reaching, swearing through clenched teeth. Boone knelt beside him and lifted the man's comm unit. "You'll send a message for me," Boone said. "Tell them what happened here. Tell them they sent the wrong army into the wrong neighborhood. Then tell them I'm still watching." Vask spat blood. "You'll die alone out here." Boone stood. "So will you." They left him there, broken but breathing. Echo followed as Boone moved down the ruined street toward the outskirts of Sector 7. She glanced back only once. "We just let him go." Boone nodded. "Here's the warning now." The city around them was silent. No sirens. No survivors. Just the echo of a war that had never officially started and would never officially end. Boone stopped at the edge of the district, where the old defense wall lay cracked and half-sunken in soil. The sun was rising, burning red through the smoke. He looked toward it, then pulled the last tracker beacon from his pocket and crushed it under his boot. Echo came up beside him. "What now?" Boone stared at the horizon for a long moment. "They'll come back eventually. With smarter tech. Better mercs. Maybe even real soldiers." She nodded. "So?" Boone slung his rifle across his back. "So I start building again." She smiled faintly. "You're going to turn this whole sector into a minefield, aren't you?" Boone looked at her sideways. It was never a battlefield. It was always a message. She walked with him in silence for a while, until the city fell behind them and only the wind spoke. And somewhere in space, the syndicate boardrooms stared at the data feed from Sector 7, watching the footage of their elite strike force being dismantled by a single man in an old ghillie suit. No official words were spoken. No meetings were scheduled. But deep beneath the surface of their confident empire, the message settled like poison in their bones. The rooftop sniper wasn't a myth. He was a ghost. And he had just gotten the green light.